All right, hello everybody. I'm Captain Ben Omni Ayivorh, and we'll be talking a little bit today about careers in aviation and specifically my career and maybe how that relates. I know there's a lot of new faces and some faces I've seen before, so I'll put my emails in that picture there. So if at any point in time any of y'all want to reach out to me, got more questions or just want any of your info, feel free to reach out all the time. I'm gonna see if I can make this a little bit easier. All right, so I saw in some of the registrations that LFA is, or maybe new to you guys, or you've never attended an event before. So on behalf of Legacy Flight Academy, I welcome you guys. But before we talk about careers in aviation, I just want to give you just a little bit more about Legacy Flight Academy. And we've got right now the Tuskegee 99 program going on, which is a nod to the 99th Pursuit Squadron, and it's running from which was the 8th, which you see on the screen there, all the way to the end of the month. And we're just trying to raise money for what we do, which is really nice about Legacy Flight Academy is 100% of donations go to making the program happen. So even staff members like myself, we don't there's not a dime that goes to any of us. It's all volunteer ran. So LFA in particular has 3 programs. The first one I would say is Eyes Above the Horizon. We usually put on events where we actually we take kids flying, and since 2015, about 1,500 youth have gotten flights, and that's once again that's totally free. All the events are totally free. We do P.A.R motivations, which is kind of like this, but maybe we'll go to a school or some site near like a Eyes Above the Horizon program, and we've probably reached close to 25,000 people a year, even though we might only have 20 something, in this right now. That usually in person, and in some other events we get a lot more. And then the capstone is the Double Victory Flight Program, which is 2 weeks in the summer, where they, depending on how many donations we get in a year, about 8 to 10 kids, full room and board, down in Montefield, in Alabama, do simulators and flight program, which essentially takes them from 0 time all the way up to solo in an aircraft. And that's, once again, 100% free and paid for. And that comes from donations, as you see here, from some of our fundraisers. So since 2015, about 45 students have gone through that program with a total of about 650 flight hours, which is pretty significant, but none of that can happen without donations. And what's really interesting right now is obviously the times we're in. A lot of people are not working and stuff, so sometimes it's tough, but every little bit counts. So we always appreciate support in that particular capacity. So that's LFA in a nutshell. Obviously, we're not necessarily putting on programs right now, and we're still trying to do stuff online, but hopefully by the summertime, things get a little bit more back to normal, and we'll have some programs then. So a little bit more about myself. Been in the Air Force about 11 years, and I would say that from my humble beginnings, especially going through school, I think there's 2 things that kind of stuck out to me. So I would say I had a normal childhood. I grew up in Virginia, outside DC, and the 2 things that I think would be a little bit different for me was my exposure to aviation early on, and how I was probably an average to below average student at school. So I wasn't a straight A student, and I'll get back to that later and why that's somewhat important, especially moving forward. So this is me. I'm putting myself out there. I don't remember quite how old I was, but you can probably tell that I'm having a good time there. I've got the little flip down sunglasses that are, I don't even think a thing anymore. I've got knee patches on. It was a good time. But I grew up in aviation. My dad, he's from Ghana, West Africa, and ever since he was a little kid, all he wanted to do was be a pilot and fly airplanes. So when he came to this country in the 70s, he made it a point to get his pilot's license and do exactly that. And because of that, he has shared that love of aviation, that exposure really early on to me, which I think is important. And that's really what Legacy Flight Academy we're all about, is this early exposure to aviation is why I am where I am today. And I think that's absolutely huge. And I'm all about sharing that that passion and that exposure early on, because I think it makes a huge difference. So other than that, I would say that I went through school. I was average enough at school to get into a four-year college, and I attended Old Dominion University in Norfolk for about a year and a half. That was me. I was on the rowing team. I had a big, old, massive afro. At the time, I was actually a vegetarian. I didn't eat meat. I was probably the furthest thing from joining the Air Force that you could probably imagine. I was taking engineering, which is a lot of math and science, which is not my strong suit. But I thought that's probably the type of stuff that I want to do. But I went freshman year, I went back sophomore year, and I realized like I don't really know what I want to do when I grow up. And I was having a hard time figuring out what I want to do. And because I was an average to below average student, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. So I ended up dropping out of college, which is probably the exact opposite thing that you want to hear. And I don't suggest or advise dropping out of college. But for me, I wasn't in the right place for me at the time. And I needed something to do, something to motivate me, something to give me a little bit more structure. And that led me to join the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force, and I would say that's probably different than, say, joining the Navy or the Armies because of aviation. It's something that I liked, and I just wanted to be around planes. So that is me graduating basic training in 2009. So I was 19 years old when I enlisted in the Air Force. I enlisted, I became a tactical aircraft maintainer, also known as a crew chief. So and I worked on jets. So I was a jet mechanic essentially, which I thought was pretty cool. My first assignment where I was assigned was in Las Vegas, Nevada, at Nellis Air Force Base, and I got assigned to the 16th Weapons School. What was really interesting is when I enlisted and I moved to Las Vegas, I can no longer go flying with my dad, which is something that I did all the time and I really enjoyed. And this was one of the key points that did that is now that I'm separated from my family, I'm on the West Coast now that I want to go flying and I don't have that ability. So it was upon me to do something to get my license. So at the time I didn't have very much money. I had to borrow money from my grandparents to help me get through my pilot certificate. I ended up paying them back a year or two later or something like that. But that was a pivotal moment right there that for me being exposed early on to aviation and just getting this done to me was no different than a kid in high school trying to get his driver's license, which I think is pretty huge to have that mindset where flying is just as normal as driving a car. It's just that we're not maybe exposed to those things early on. So I got my POTS license at this point in time. I'm 20 years old. You probably can't see in that, but I wear glasses, and I always thought for the most part I wouldn't fly professionally because my eyes weren't very good. So through the Air Force, which was also really awesome, is I ended up getting laser eye surgery, so I don't have to wear glasses anymore. So that was really interesting. So I was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. I worked for the 16th Weapons School, which is kind of like the Top Gun for the Air Force, and in particular F-16s. So I did that for about 2 years. After that, I went to Kuwait, had a deployment. This is the only picture I could find because I remember at the time cell phones didn't really have cameras, but it's a sandstorm, kind of like you see in the movie Mummy. It was actually pretty surreal. But spent a couple 4 or 5 months out in Kuwait, which is a humbling thing. And then when I came back, I was really wanting more at that point. Working at the weapons school, down the street is this place called the Thunderbirds. Big red, white, and blue hangar, red, white, and blue jets. If you guys been to air shows, you've seen them. And there's one of those things, just working down the street from them and viewing them from my perspective, it was really cool, and I was blown away. And it was definitely something that I wanted to do. I wanted more. I enjoyed being a crew chief, but I wanted to do more than that. So this was another pivotal part of really getting out there, meeting people, and further exposing people like yourselves to aviation. I thought I was really something, and was really interested in being a maintainer. And that's my assistant crew chief and my former pilot there. Being exposed to people and people thinking that you're always a pilot. And what's just really interesting is that I was a pilot, but I wasn't, a fighter pilot in the show. And it kind of pushed me that I wanted to do a little bit more. So this goes back to being average at school and doing stuff like that. So it got to a point where I got my eyes fixed. I'm now surrounded by pilots. I'm now exposing people, and I'm thinking about the next steps in my career, and I'm like, well, I would love to be a pilot. And the one big thing stopping me is that I don't have a degree. Going to college is a requirement for being an officer. And that was one of those things that now I'm a full-time working adult, and the Thunderbirds have a rigorous show schedule. You're gone 200 days out of the year performing shows. So I ended up going back to school online. So I would work 12-hour days. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning. I'd get on my laptop. I would do my schoolwork. I'd work a full day, do an air show, talk to people, come back later that evening, and then do homework till my brain turned to applesauce. And this was really another pivotal point for me, because knowing that I wasn't a very good student before, I didn't have great study habits. I didn't develop the habits that I probably needed to develop in middle school, high school. That I'm now relearning a lot of things, which was definitely different for me. And at the time, I would say part of my issues with being an average or below average student is not knowing the next steps. Why? Probably at younger ages, like, why are we doing civics? Why are we doing chemistry? Why are we doing certain math class when I always have a calculator? None of that stuff is relevant in the real world. That type of questions are the questions that they got me to lead me down the path of why I'm probably not the best, or wasn't the best student at the time. But now with a clear goal in front of me of, hey, I need to get a degree so I can get to my goal of being a pilot, it became very easy. I would say easier for me to see the things that I need to do to become a much better student. So I thought that was very important. So after 2 years of traveling all the time and doing homework on a laptop in a hotel room in some random state, I finally finished my degree, and I was able to apply to become an officer. And I'll branch off a little bit right here. There's 3 ways that you can become an officer. There's 3 commissioning sources, as they say. There's the Air Force Academy, which you guys may or may not have heard about in Colorado. And that's the official college, if you will, of the Air Force, which you would apply to like you would any other college out of high school. And you would attend 4 years there, you get your degree, and upon graduating, you'd commission. There's the ROTC program, which is not at every school, but a lot of major schools around the country, where you still go to college like a normal student, but you'll partake in things like field training along the way. And then at the end of your 4 years or 5 years, or however long it takes you to graduate, that you would also commission. And then the third way, which is the way that I went, was officer training school, where let's just say you went to college already and you're just a person off the street and you say, hey, I want to join the Air Force, become a pilot. You would apply to OTS, officer training school. So you have your degree, you put a package together, you get letters of recommendation, and then you submit that, and it goes to a board, and they select however many people or however many slots they have to become an officer. And same thing, you put, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a airborne battle manager, I want to be a RPA pilot, all those things. They give you a bunch of selections, and you submit your package, and they'll tell you whether or not you got selected to be an officer, and then furthermore, what job specifically you got. So I applied to OTS. I wanted to be a pilot. I thought I got really, really lucky, and I got picked up to be a pilot. I don't know if you all know, but there's a pilot shortage in the Air Force right now. So if you want to be a pilot in the Air Force, it's not going to get better in the near future, if you will. We're still on a path to recovery, but if it's something that you want to do, especially being a pilot, there will be opportunities in the future for sure. So after I went to OTS, which is it's a 10-week program in Alabama, and you do pretty much everything they do at the Air Force Academy in Rotc, but they just try to condense it in this really short amount of time to make you an officer. So after officer training, I went to POT training in Northern Texas, Wichita Falls, at the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program, which is a unique program that has all the Euro-NATO countries, so Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Finland. They have all these countries all over Europe that also go to POT training with you. So a lot of my classmates were from different countries, which is really interesting. This here is like my dollar ride, as they call it, my very first ride in pilot training. And you start out in the T6, which is a pretty fun airplane to fly after you've got the hang of it. But starting out, it's pretty intense. So they divide it into 3 phases. The first phase is pretty short, which is ground training. The second phase is a T6 here, and then the third phase is T38 training, which is the jet. That's after my solo there, which was another thing too. Flying a plane by yourself for the first time is definitely something memorable. So pilot training is roughly 55 weeks long. You'll probably finish with around 200 flight hours. You do more, I would say, simulators that you can count, which is like the video game version to practice before you get in the airplane. And through this time, they are constantly evaluating you to see what kind of airplane that you could potentially fly, whether it's a fighter jet, whether it's a bomber, whether it's a cargo plane, whether it's even a helicopter, which is even a possibility. So that's me in the T-38, which is the last phase. So at this particular pilot training, everybody goes to the T-38, which is a fighter bomber track after T-6s, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will fly a fighter or a bomber. You could fly anything, to include like tankers and stuff. So this is where it really ramps up, where your study habits, all the things that you've learned in school, even in high school and to college, all those things really play a factor here, because it's, as they say, drinking out of a fire hose. The amount of information they put at you, the amount of flights that you do. You might fly twice a day, 5 days a week, which is not uncommon. It's a very fast and rigorous pace. So studying is huge to stay on top of that. So towards the end of pilot training, they have what they call drop night, where a selection, where you'll find out what aircraft you've been selected to fly. A lot of that has to come with your grades, how well you did in pilot training. A little bit has to do with what aircraft are available, and another portion is, say, how well your classmates did in proportion to you, and then you put together what they call a dream sheet. I hope that I fly a fighter jet first, a bomber next, so on and so forth, and then they rack and stack and they figure out, and they have an event they call drop night, and you open a little envelope and it tells you what you'll be flying for the most part for the rest of your Air Force career. So I was lucky enough to fly the F-15 Eagle, which is a phenomenal air-to-air fighter. It's unlike anything else. It's from the 70s. It's a little old, but it's tried and true. It's combat proven. It's got a record of 104-0, which is pretty impressive. So after pilot training, if you've been selected to fly a fighter, you'll go what they call Intro to Fighter Fundamentals, which is an 8-week course, which really just prepares you to be a wingman and teaches you basic fighter maneuvers. And a lot of times too, that's where they might weed you out and say, hey, you're a decent pilot, but maybe not a fighter pilot. Maybe that's not the right fit for you. So once you get through that 8-week course, then you go to what they call the B course, or the RTU, Replenishment Training Unit, and this is where they teach you how to fly now your particular aircraft, and whether that's a fighter or a bomber or airlift. The B course is where you learn to employ your aircraft. The B course for the F-15 is roughly 6 to 9 months. I was up in Oregon, and it's the same process now. Every step of the way in pilot training, they keep ramping it up. And if you didn't have great study habits, if you were still kind of behind the ball before, it starts to show itself. So from when I started pilot training, which was in June 2016, to when I became a combat mission ready pilot in the F-15 was April 2009. So roughly 3 years of training, and there's not really any vacation or breaks in between. So you could say it's like going to college with no summers off, and it's just it's a long pace. With that said, if they were to do this at a normal pace, it would take 5 or 6 years, which most people don't have the commitment or the patience to do at a leisurely pace. So they try to cram a bunch in there. So not to dissuade you from going down that path, but note that it's a lot of intense training in a short amount of time. So one thing that is really unique about this aircraft and what I do now is the mission. So right now I'm stationed with the Louisiana Air National Guard down in New Orleans, even though I'm an active duty pilot, which is a unique opportunity for me. So besides being a normal fighter squadron and having to deploy and do normal fighter squadron things, we have the Homeland Defense mission, which is really interesting. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, Christmas, 4th of July, Thanksgiving. Even as we speak right now, there's a crew down there ready to scramble at a moment's notice. If you've seen Air Force One or any movie ever where they say scramble the fighter jets and they pick up the red telephone and say we need jets in the air, that's a real thing, and we do that here in New Orleans and other parts of the country as well. So unfortunately, like some other places, like I haven't been to work in a couple of weeks. I'm teleworking, I'm doing stuff like this, and then I will go to alert and I'll be there for 3 or 4 days doing that mission, and we've got it divided up right now as well between all the pilots, because the mission must go on as far as Homeland Defense is concerned. So that's a really cool, unique mission that we do here in New Orleans, and getting to be a part of that, especially active duty, I think is pretty rewarding. And then the next portion of what this jet normally does is what they call defensive counter air or offensive counter air. So whether you're escorting your friendly guys into a mission to say bomb a target, or you're trying to defend a target, and the example they use sometimes is you're trying to defend a factory that makes goods or something like that, and the enemy's trying to attack you. It's our job to defend that. So it's a pretty interesting, pretty high pace job, but definitely very rewarding on the back end of that. And what I would say when it comes to being, say you want to know the difference between, say, a fighter pilot and a tanker pilot or a cargo pilot, the biggest thing besides how we employ or having missiles or guns, all that stuff, is what I would say is crew resource management. So usually, just like an airliner, you've got two pilots sitting up front, and they can discuss and make decisions, emergencies, and all that stuff. And the biggest difference with a fighter jet, particularly say the F-15, is it's just one person in the airplane. But the concept of having multiple people making decisions, getting through emergencies or all that stuff is exactly the same. You just have your own plane to worry about while making those decisions. So I'm sure you've heard of the term wingman. That is a very real concept that we use all the time to make sure that we get through the mission. So this particular picture here is this is actually when I was in training to do air refueling for the first time. That's an instructor in the back seat there with me. But it's one of those things that it's a very interesting concept, and that's the biggest difference in, say, fighter aviation compared to say normal general aviation or something like that. This is over the Pacific somewhere. We deployed this past summer out into the Pacific. So this was us crossing the Pacific Ocean, which is very, very, very big. This particular flight was roughly 9 hours from takeoff to landing. We flew, I think, from Hawaii all the way back to New Orleans straight, which was pretty intense. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about the jet, and a couple other things. Actually, I would say that's about it for right now. This is obviously the first draft, the rough hack, and I see there's quite a few of you there, so I'm more than willing to open it up to any. I know there's close to 30 people in here now. Any questions about pilot training, school, anything like that? If anybody has any questions, I see a hand. Go for it. What's your question?
It's like, when you have, are there a lot of buttons in there, and like you got confused at one point?
Are there a lot of buttons in the cockpit? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, there's actually a ton of buttons, and what I will say is pretty interesting that, especially say your generation or my generation, is we play a lot of video games, or have played video games at some point in time, and you think about a controller and how many buttons it has. I think it's helpful. It's one of those things that, you know, some people tell you video games are bad, but having that ability to manipulate a bunch of buttons is actually a useful concept. So in the jet, the stick that you fly with and the throttle, so left and right hand, there's like probably 30 to 40 buttons just on the sticks for you to control things. And they're all put there for a reason, so you don't have to take your hands off while you're flying. But there are, yes, a lot of buttons. And it comes with practice and muscle memory of how to manipulate those buttons. So yeah, it's a lot of multitasking as well. But just like anything else, I mean, if you've played video games, the very first time maybe it's tough to do that, but after that you get used to it. But just like anything else, it takes practice. All right, I see you. Yep, go for it.
What is the highest rank of aircraft? Like out of the fighter jets, the bombers, like what is the highest rank?
I wouldn't say that they are ranked. Just like anything else, I think each, especially the F-15, it has its specific mission, and it's really good at that specific mission. But if you had asked me to do something else, I'm not very good at it because I don't train to that. just like a cargo plane's really good at carrying stuff. That's what it does. So they all have their piece in the puzzle, and when it comes to actually putting a mission together, that everybody, if they do their job specifically right, it all falls together. But it's really interesting. Red Flag in Las Vegas, they put on these big war games. They'll have 40 to 50 different airplanes in the sky at the same time doing their individual missions, whether it's a helicopter, whether it's a tanker, whether it's a fighter jet. So there's not, I wouldn't say one is better than the other. They just have their specific missions.
Okay. Nice. Also, I have a question.
Yep.
What is in fighter jets? Is there a rank in fighter jets also, or no?
So I would say between the flight, we have what we call flight leads and we have wingmen. So the flight lead, he's the one in charge of, say, the mission. He's the one that dictates where the others go, if you will. So yes, there is a bit of a rank and formality there. What's interesting is that I would just say at the end of the day, the flight lead has the hammer, if you will, to make the final decision, yes or no. As a wingman, you still have autonomy. You still make your own decisions. You still have your own responsibilities, but it's just a flight lead's job to monitor and say, hey, you're doing the right thing, or keep going, or hey, no, I need you to do something else right now. So there is a little bit of a hierarchy. The normal for, say, an F-15 is 4 jets is a normal unit, if you will. So in that 4, number 1 is obviously number 1. Number 2 and 4, what we call wingmen, and number 3 is also a flight lead, so he's in charge of 4. So 1 and 3 kind of work together to dictate everything, and 2 and 4, for the most part, just do their own responsibilities and then listen to the direction of 1 and 3.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Is there a class in high school to prepare for this career?
So not necessarily. And this is a question that I get a lot, and I think it's very important, and I kind of alluded to it. So when I say I was a average to below average student, is I kind of had that mindset of, is there classes that help me with things after school? And the answer to my own personal questions was no, I don't see the point in any of this. And say, for instance, like geometry. A lot of people are like, well, what is the point of geometry? And it's not necessarily the content that is important. So to answer your question, every class that you take right now is important to prepare you for this. So the one thing that I lacked when I went through high school and college the first time was I didn't know how to teach myself, if you will. So a lot of, especially when going to school online, you are teaching yourself, because you've got the class or maybe the teacher for a few moments, or you're answering discussion posts, but really when you're reading the material, and even when you get to college, you'll have your lecture, but a lot of it is on you to self-study. So what I did not take away was like learning how to learn. So the way that I generally base it is, when you go to high school, you're really just learning how to learn. The content is geometry and physics and chemistry and stuff that maybe we don't find very interesting, but learning how to learn, especially tough subjects that you find not interesting at all, are probably the most important times for you to take note of how you teach yourself. When you get to college, now you're kind of focusing down what you're learning. You know, let's say you want to be a business major or a history major, that you're focusing down now on what you want to learn, and you take those skills that you learned in high school, even when it's things that you don't want to learn, and apply those. And then once you get to your job, really that's where it happens. Your OJT, whatever job it is, whether it's a pilot or something else, you take the skills that you've learned in high school and college on how to teach yourself, how to learn better, and those ultimately prepare you for what you're going to do next. So for me, the path that I took is a little bit of a long way, because I didn't teach myself. I didn't know how I learned properly, and I suffered for it. And because of that, I didn't get very good grades. And because of that, I ended up leaving college because I didn't necessarily have what it took to accomplish that at the time. So what I would say to you is that every class is absolutely important. And if you don't take away the content from the class, like physics or something, that's fine. But knowing how you learn, especially tough subjects, is very important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What are the best colleges to go to be a pilot?
So what I would, it's a tricky question. I answer with, it depends. If you want to be a military pilot or an Air Force pilot, then I would suggest that you go to the academy or to school of the Air Force ROTC program, which a quick Google will definitely help you with that. Let's say you want to be a commercial pilot, you want to be an airline pilot, then you don't necessarily need to go to those schools, nor do you need to enlist or commission or become an officer in the Air Force. So it really depends. There are actually a bunch of schools out there. People have heard of Embry-Riddle or I think University of North Dakota that have flying programs integrated with the school. So while you're getting your bachelor's degree, you're actually doing flight training at the same time. So that it depends on what your kind of end goal is with flying. For some people, like for me, I don't mind if it's military flying or airline flying. I just want to be flying. So it kind of depends on that one. And the other thing too is that you don't necessarily. What's really interesting about being a pilot is that your degree isn't as big a factor, say, as some other careers. So I know pilots that have a finance major. I know pilots that have a history major. I know pilots that have a math major. So their degrees don't necessarily have to do with what they're doing as a pilot, but it's just something that's a little bit interesting. What I would suggest is, especially if you want to be a pilot, when it comes to a degree, make sure it's something that you actually want, and that perhaps in the future, if the pilot thing doesn't work out or you have health issues and you can't fly anymore, that it's something that you want to actually do and work with.
I have one more question.
Mm-hmm.
How much money do you make as being a pilot?
Also a trick question. So being in the military, you can actually Google anybody's pay, the military pay scale. So I'm a captain, so you can Google what does a captain in the Air Force make, and it'll tell you what I make. If you're an airline pilot, that's totally different. That's based on seniority, what aircraft they fly, how often they fly. But generally speaking, say airline pilots make decent money. What I will say is, at least being in the Air Force and being a pilot, that I would describe myself as comfortable. The health care that comes with it, the GI Bill, the school benefits with being in the military, I think are there. So I don't make as much money as an airline pilot, not even close. But I have plenty to provide for me and my family. So I know that there's a raise. Yeah, you're welcome. There's a raise hand function because I've seen some of you raising your hands like physically, and I can see some of you, but I can't see all of you.
I have 2 questions.
Uh-huh.
Like, when you get a degree, then can you drop out of college?
Well, technically, when you get a degree, you're done, so you don't have to go anymore. That's the nice part. What I will say with that, though, so dropping out of college is leaving before you're finished. So generally, when you go, you should absolutely finish. But for me at the time, I was kind of running away from education, and no matter what you do, when I dropped out of school and I joined the Air Force, it was kind of to get away from school. And then you join the Air Force, you know what the first thing they do? Granted, it's Air Force. They send you to school, and you have to study. You're no matter what you do in life, you're going to go to school. So trying to get away from school is kind of the wrong mindset, and that's the mindset I had, as opposed to embracing school and realizing no matter what you do, you're going to have to go to school. Whether if you get a job at McDonald's, they're going to have to train you. That's school. You still got to learn. You still got to excel, grow. So. But yeah, so if anything, if you finish school faster, then you don't have to do it anymore. But generally speaking, you'll be in school the rest of your life.
I have another question.
Yep.
How many jets or like helicopters can be in the air
At the same time? Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to earlier, so it depends on what we're doing. So say in my particular case, when we fly normal, we're not flying normal right now, but when we fly normal at home, we probably fly somewhere between 14 and 20 jets a day total. Not all at the same time, but probably for like a big mission here locally, we'll do about 10 jets at a time. When we get together, we'll do exercise and stuff. You can get 100 jets in the same piece of sky, which is pretty incredible. But generally speaking, it's a lot of coordination, a lot of practice, a lot of planning to get that many jets in the sky at the same time. But it is pretty awesome to see it when it does happen.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
How'd you get your call sign?
So my call sign is Omni, and a lot of times, one, it's generally thought to be very rude to ask somebody how they got their call sign. No, I'm kidding. So a lot of times, a lot of firepods, their call signs will mean something, or there's a story attached to them. So in my case, especially four-letter call signs like Omni, that usually the OM and I stands for something. In this case, it doesn't really stand for that. I like to joke that I'm like aware of everything. I'm like Omni, you know. But Omni, it's kind of a play on words with my last name. So my last name is Ayivorh. So it's like omnivore is pretty much what they call me. So either that or I enjoy the occasional salad with my steak. But it's definitely more convenient in my particular case, having to say my last name, that they were very eager to give me a call sign that's much easier to say than Ayivorh. So, yeah. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Well, if not, let me put this back up here just so you, if you got any questions or anything else like that, there's my email at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to me
You got a
about.
question. One of the young ladies wanted to ask a question.
Man. Well, go for it. I can't necessarily see that part of the.
I was going to say, how do you apply for the camp?
For the what?
How do you apply for the camp? The one that you were talking about.
Oh, like Eyes Above the Horizon or the Double Victory?
Yes.
So there's a lot of information on our website. How old are you, if I may ask?
I'm 11.
You're 11.
Yes.
So for the Double Victory Flight Program, we're focusing on kids that are 16 to 19 years old, with the big thing being you can solo a plane legally at the age of 16. So we're trying to get people that can. So you got a few years in front of you, which is awesome. But on the website, you can look all that information up. But what I would encourage you to do is the Eyes Above the Horizon program. That one you can get a flight absolutely for free. But yes, it's all on the website.
Thank you very much.
Do pilots and engineers have to go through the same process?
It's an interesting question. I would say it's a different process just based off the jobs that they have, but generally speaking, that the processes are probably very, very similar. So for some reason, and I don't know if there's anything tied to it, so a lot of pilots have engineering degrees. And I don't know if that's engineers are attracted to aviation in the same capacity, but yeah, it's similar, but not quite the same. Cool. All right.
Excuse me, Ben.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, I'm U.S. Vance of the second.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see me on the video here.
Let me try to find.
Because I was having trouble with it. I see some students. I was able to see a line of students.
Here.
Let me just finish. Okay.
You should be able to see.
Okay. What do I hit? Start my, no, that's your start my video.
If you want me to see you, you can hit that. If not, that's fine. I can hear you.
All right, I'll just talk to you for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I'm U.S. Vance. I'm the vice president down here in Philadelphia, chapter Tuskegee Airmen.
Mm-hmm.
And I came across the email that they sent, yesterday, I believe it was.
Yep.
And I just wanted to reach out and say hello to you from Philadelphia.
Well, I appreciate
Congratulations on what you're doing. This is where we're trying to go with our youth and aviation programs down here in Philadelphia.
That's awesome.
So I see your email address, and our president is Mel Payne. I'm the vice president.
Okay.
Aaron Watkins is the treasurer, and Tony Tony Moreland is the financial secretary, and he flies KC-10s refuel out of McGuire.
Awesome.
So I'll reach out to you on an email and go
Please.
from there. Because I don't want to
Please
take
shoot
up
me an
any
email.
time. Right.
I will definitely, yeah.
I just
I'm
want
not
to
sure.
congratulate. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, we're always looking for new cities and other places to put events on, and it's awesome to have people there already established, and whether or not they're in the same capacity we are, it's always nice to hear that. So yeah, please shoot me an email, and I will definitely be in touch.
And young adults, he gave you a lot of good information, and I congratulate all of you. And thank you very much.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And I mean that especially for everybody. If there's anything, if you want to talk to me about video games or whatever the case may be, or you got a question about the Air Force or POTS, all that stuff, please feel free to email me anytime. Oh, see, I can see some hands. Are you waving, or you got a question?
Captain Omni, do you guys host events in Louisiana?
We have not, and I've been incredibly busy since I've been here, and it's something that's on my radar, if you will, because I think same thing. I think there's a presence here, and now that I'm here, I got here about a year ago, and then I deployed in that year, so I've been gone and busy. But it's definitely something on my radar, and if we did, especially you can go on the website and set up for our newsletter. So the moment we're putting on events and stuff, you would know about it. But yeah, it's definitely on our radar. It's something we want to try to do in the future.
What was the you talked about Eyes Above the Horizon? What's that program?
So Eyes Above the Horizon, man, I got my handy dandy pamphlet here. This is our new pamphlets. More to come on that. But yeah, Eyes Above the Horizon, it's a single day orientation program. So there's a flight involved in that, but usually there's other activities where you'll meet people like myself, other pilots and stuff like that, and you'll learn about Tuskegee Airmen. You learn about, I would say, aerospace careers and stuff like that. And that program is open to kids young as I think it's 9 or 10 years old, all the way up to middle school and college students as well. So we usually try to put around 5 or 6 of those a year, which it's a great time. I've done plenty of those, and the closest one to say here for me in Louisiana is when we do the Tuskegee at Mott Field, which is pretty cool, where you're actually at ground zero, if you will. So it's definitely a fun program, and that's actually how I got started with Legacy Flight Academy is volunteering through those programs. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
I have a question.
Shoot.
So, Mr. Omni, thank you for all the information you give us so far. I'm 17 years old, and I have a private pilot's license, and I've been to the Highs Horizon for the longest now. I'm Thaddeus Warlaw, by the way. And I was I turn 18 next month, and I was just wondering what are the requirements to like fly for you guys, like to fly the kids around. So I've been wanting to do it for the longest. So I just wanted to know.
That's a great question, honestly. I don't know, but I would say is that I'll get back to you on that. Obviously, I got your
Ben, you can just,
info.
if you're looking to volunteer, I would request just go to the legacyflightacademy.org website, and on there is a page for if you want to support and you want to sign up to be a volunteer, and you can go on there and you can definitely be a part of our program and help Legacy Flight Academy grow, because it's guys like you and Ben and a lot of our other volunteers to help get these young kids in the air and doing stuff. So that's where a bulk of the information. So if you want to volunteer and support, please go to there. If you want to get it in your city, please go to that website, and you can put questions on there for us to get to a city where you are.
See, thank you. I see Miles Millhouse. Do you have a question?
Yeah. So I've been doing like flight simulation. I bought like a yoke and a joystick and stuff, and doing mainly like airliners and like a 737 or something. Would you say
Mm-hmm.
that's like beneficial to becoming like a pilot in the future?
100% yes.
Yeah.
So I was the same thing as a kid, especially when I couldn't fly or rainy days. And my dad always tells a story. What I would do is, I'd get on Microsoft Simulator, I'd pick the 747 or whatever, and I'd take off from San Francisco at night. I'd go to bed and then I'd wake up in the morning. Like I'd let the computer run, and I'd wake up in the morning and then land in like Tokyo. I remember my dad taught me how to shoot an approach, and I remember the one thing that was just like amazing to me is I would turn on the autopilot and let the plane fly the approach down
Oh,
the
like
runway,
a
which I thought was the
ILS.
coolest thing. Yeah. So I would say that is feeding your interest and your exposure in aviation, and it is 100% effective and helpful because, as I mentioned in pod training, you probably end up with about 200 hours after pod training, but you probably have like twice, maybe triple that in simulators. Simulators in military aviation and the airlines is huge. It's very, very big. So it is all applicable. And what's interesting too, I think, and if there's some airline pods in, they can correct me. A lot of your training you will do in a simulator, and your very first flight is with passengers in the back because the simulators are that real that they do all their training in the simulators, and then you're with a check pilot or an experienced pilot when you do your first flight on the airlines, which is it's pretty cool. So I would say that yes, I did that as a kid. It is totally effective and useful. So yeah, I'd keep that up.
Yeah.
Hey,
See
I'm
another.
Andrea Lewis. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
But
no, you're good.
I just want to tell you you were 100% right because I just finished my simulator training and my first flight will be on the jet with people, my first landing. So we'll pray for that.
I'm very confident that it will go just fine. Do you
And
have
I
another
also
question?
wanted to, oh, sorry, you have
Very
another
good.
question? I just wanted to say a quick hello. I'm a Captain Andrea Lewis, and I am a 707 pilot down at in the Georgia Air National Guard. I have a similar, I guess, background to Omni here, but I just wanted to say a quick shout out to all the ladies out there. Please, keep pursuing your dream, and Legacy Flight Academy is a great opportunity for you all. So just keep doing your thing.
Did you say you were a 707 pilot?
Yes, I know it's shocking, but they're still out there.
They're still out there. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a 707 pilot. So
Tried and true. Did you have another question, Miles? I just see the hand thing. You good? Okay. I know there's another hand raised. Is it the?
Yeah, you gotta
Sharp?
unmute them.
Oh, they're unmuted. You boys got a question? Another question?
Yeah, do you like go on aircraft carriers and stuff and then take off?
No. So aircraft carriers is primarily the Navy and naval aviation. So they fly jets from aircraft carriers, and I tip my hat to them because landing or flying a jet is difficult enough, but trying to land on a boat, say at night, that's its own challenge. So we don't do that in the Air Force, but the Navy does. And everything that I mentioned is an extremely similar process. And some people prefer naval aviation over Air Force, but it's just a matter of preference.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My question: what was the program, the flight simulator that Miles was speaking of?
So I'm not particularly sure which one Miles uses. There's a Microsoft Simulator.
I use X-Plane 11, but I'm planning on switching to the new Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 when that comes out. But currently, I use X-Plane 11.
So X-Plane, it's just the letter X plane, which is a good one as well. But Microsoft Simulator or X-Plane, both pretty capable. And what I will say is when I first started, I didn't have a joystick or any of that stuff, so I'd be like flying the plane with a keyboard and mouse, which is less than ideal, but you get the concept.
Okay, so it's very again.
Oh, and Prepare 3D. That's another one.
And Prepare 3D.
All right. Looks like we got about 5 minutes left here. So if you got any parting shots, any more burning questions, feel free to shout out. I see a hand raised. Go for it.
Yeah, can you explain what's on your back wall?
Yeah, so these are just, I would say, the patches I've got in this short amount of time I've spent in my flying career. Like, it's a good one, the legacy patch. But on the left side there starts at the top of what I had in pilot training through IFF, through all the squadrons that I've been in. This one from T6 is, in pilot training, sometimes they give you call signs, kind of playing on to the future. So Omni is my call sign now, and that one will stick for a while, but they give you ones in pilot training. This one right here is Bob. I know it's backwards or mirrored. BAWB, and there's six little T6s. And at the time, they knew I was a Thunderbird, so Bob stands for Blue Angel Wannabe, which was a poke at my past, and they hoped that it stung a little bit. But so a lot of those patches, you'll just accumulate all those in even just a few years, and there's plenty of extra room for when you trade with other countries or stuff like that, just deployment patches. Any other questions? Oh, I see it. I see a hand. Is it Stutz? Stutz? Go for it.
So,
I hear you.
So, when you're talking about like how do you tell one plane from another?
Yeah, so I would say it's actually a whole skill set, especially when it comes to being a fighter pilot. We call it VisRecce or VID, visual recognition, and specifically for a fighter pilot, we got little books that's just pictures and pictures and pictures and pictures of different planes, and it is on me, same reference study habits, where I have to go through and I have to memorize and study each individual plane and what it looks like. Obviously, when you say you deploy and you're flying near a certain country, they have certain types of planes. We know that, and you'll study those. But generally speaking, yeah, you've got to study it and know it. It's part of the job. For me, particularly as a kid, I was always interested in planes, and it was no different for me than learning the different types of cars out there and different paint jobs and what plane does what. So I kind of was lucky in that regard. So that makes studying easier for me when it comes to learning what new planes look like and stuff like that. But yeah, it's study. Answer your question?
I was going to add, but
Say that one more time.
Oh, the badge in the back with the Ghanaian flag on it. What does that one mean?
Yeah, so that's actually, it's from the Ghanaian Air Force. When I was in OTS, they're like little, they look like little C-130s. They're little twin-engine cargo planes. So when I was in OTS, so last name Ayivorh is Ghanaian. There was another pilot going through another leadership school there, and he was from Ghana. And one of my old public affairs officers was also going through the same school. So I met him briefly. So I got that patch. And obviously, being pilots, it was just one of those things. But it's a pretty good eye. But yeah. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I see Miles has got his hand raised, and I see the boys got another question. We got 1 minute. So Miles, shoot real quick.
It's gonna be a pretty interesting question, but do fighter jets use an ILS system too, or is it only airliners?
We do. So in the F-15 particularly, it's not as up to date as say new airplanes. I do have a GPS capability, but I can't do say GPS approaches. I can shoot a handful of approaches: an ILS, a localizer, and a TACAN, which is essentially a localizer. All the other new approaches, the plane does not have the ability. So for the most part, I always shoot ILS approaches. That's standard for me. When you go through pilot training, you will shoot every approach imaginable. So there'll be no shortage of approaches. And the boys, I see you guys are jumping up and down. Do you guys have another question?
Since like the stealth bombers, like are they just spy planes? Are they just
No, they're exactly as you mentioned. They're bombers. So the premise behind the stealth bomber is that when he's going to bomb a target, that you can't see him coming because he's stealth. So that's their main goal, and that falls under bombers. So definitely, it's a similar mission set, but just a little bit different. All right, well, we're in overtime, but I appreciate you all coming out and listening to me chat a little bit about my career and all that stuff. I'll say it again 1,000 times. There's my email. Please give me a shout if you guys need anything. Otherwise, I appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to listen.
Tell your parents to contribute to Legacy Flight Academy.
I'm about to say, I think my mom's listening, so she heard you.
That's who I was talking about, your mom.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all, and I'll see you all out there.
Thank
Okay.
Thank you.
Follow us on social media.
Thank you.
We'll
Yep.
contribute.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.